And we're going to talk about demand and supply, pricing strategies, product differentiation, and value pricing. And I'm going to have some interaction here so that you can sort of think as a consumer. So basically, price is derived from the interaction between the supply and demand, and you've probably all heard of that before. So it depends on both the supply that's available and what the consumers demand or what they want. And the equilibrium price is, where you end up selling that product. It's also called the market clearing price. So it's an exchange between the buyer and seller and a price that you agree on. And it may not be necessarily considered fair by the buyer or the seller, because it again depends on how much is out there and how much is supplied. So you could work really hard, but if everybody else decides to grow tomatoes at the same time you do, it's a perishable product. You can't keep them except if you process them, and that's going to be a lower price. So it may not be what you considered fair. It may not be what the consumer considers fair. So here's what we call the supply and demand curve. So as the price goes up, you as the supplier are happy to produce more, because that's what, and we have this cobweb theory in economics. So like if the price of corn is high this year, typically what happens is next year everybody's going to plant corn, and then what's going to happen? The price is going to drop because everybody else did it, because the demand is still the same. So as the price increases, the demand is going to drop. So when you move along the demand curve, as the demand increases, you'll want to supply more. And that's where, like right now, heirloom tomatoes, for example, seem to be popular, so people are producing more of those. And like you said, butternut squash, probably people will grow it next year because the price is high, and then it's going to go down again. In terms of movement on the supply curve, as the demand goes up, then you can see the price goes from P1 to P2. So you have the same supply curve, but if you shift, and suddenly something becomes popular, then you can get a higher price. But so what do? You try to research the market as much as you can, ask your consumers what's important to them, and try to anticipate some of this. And have you heard the term price elasticity? Okay, that's how sensitive price, the quantity that consumers buy, is to the change in price. So certain things are very price elastic and other things aren't. Things that we consider luxuries are considered very elastic. Things that are necessities aren't so elastic. So that's why I say really the more profitable items tend to be the luxury ones, because people will pay more for those. The problem is in tough economic times they may eliminate those as well. So they're sensitive in both directions. Now, when is demand less elastic? Well, when there's few substitutes or no competition for that. I remember years ago when I was young and sugar went up, then all the home economists were telling us how to make things with honey and other things. You have to find, there's usually substitutes for things. When buyers are not really ready to notice higher prices. So if people have high incomes and they want what they want, they're not going to worry about it. Starbucks doesn't seem to be faring too badly because of the when things go down. Because it's a luxury product, but it's not a huge amount of somebody's consumer budget. Buyers are slow to change their habits or searching for other things, and buyers think that prices are justified because there's quality improvement. So that's where the diversification in the niche marketing comes in. Okay, so price elastic or sensitive items are things where customers shop on price. If they see a slight change in price, they're going to change their buying habits, and competitors step in to fill that spot. Inelastic items, they tend to be governed by other factors like high quality, status, and so forth. Okay, so how do you determine the demand for your products? Well, the webinar, if you haven't looked at that, I strongly advise you to look at that because they had a lot of good information on how to get information about the consumers in your area. There's also a lot of trade journals in our industry. There's government statistics. The new USDA statistics just came out. There's private marketing firms, which probably most of you are not going to spend the money on that, and I don't think I would either. Research firms. You can do a lot of searching on the internet. Look at the competition, or most importantly, ask your customers. Find out ways to find out what they want. So one of the things that helps determine how you price is where on this product life cycle your products are. So we've got the introductory phase when you're just starting new products, the growth phase, which is great, and with floriculture, we were in that for most of the time I've been a professor. The problem is, I think now we're kind of in the maturity phase with a lot of our crops, and then the decline phase. So how you price depends on where your product is on this cycle. So how do you price? Well, in the introductory phase, you can price options are low price, which is you want to entice more customers, you're introducing a new product, you get them going, or you can do price skimming, which means you set the price high, kind of like Apple does. They've got the latest and the greatest, and they think you're going to pay for it. But what happens? Then other people do knockoffs, and so then the price is going to fall a little bit. And on your in your business planning workbook on page 77, is where the pricing section is, and there's a lot of information on all the different strategies there. In terms of the growth stage, the pricing strategies that you use are very similar to the introductory stage. Well, what happens at the mature stage? There's more and more competition, the prices are going to start to fall, and what do? The key thing is if you can differentiate, if you can do something different than what other people are doing, because the money was to be made mostly in the growth stage, and now it's going to be a struggle. And the decline stage, pretty much get out. We used to have, for example, roses used to be really a premium product, and we thought that nobody can compete overseas because they're difficult to ship. Well, somehow Ecuador found out a way to do it. Now roses are very cheap, great for consumers, not so great for the people that used to be rose growers in the U.S. So if they didn't think ahead and move into something else or move to Ecuador, they're probably in trouble right now. Okay, so how do you come up with the price? Well, first of all, you need to know your cost, because even though if it's going to cost you a lot to produce a product, consumers aren't going to pay that. You're not going to stay in business unless your price is higher than your cost. So you need to know that to establish what you call the floor price. And then equally important is knowing what consumers are willing to pay and what they think the product is worth. So that's what we call the ceiling. So most of the time the consumers are willing to pay you somewhere in between there, somewhere between what it costs you to produce it and their maximum price. So that's the area that we're talking about that we want to put the price. So we want to push a pencil and paper or a spreadsheet or some other way of coming up with how am I going to price my product. And we're going to talk about cost accounting a little bit later to get to there, but you want to identify items that you can produce at a low cost. So those are the items that you probably want to focus on. Those are your comparative advantage. You want to identify items that cost you a lot to produce, and you either want to reduce those, buy them from somewhere else, or figure out a way to make it work, or realize, well, those are items that I'm good at producing, I do a good job, I'm going to lose some money, but I'm going to bring in customers into my business if I do that. And then you want to determine the price floor. And you need to do this for yourself, because I can't tell you how much it costs to produce a greenhouse tomato or a poinsettia or whatever, because your costs are different from everybody else's. And they vary for lots of different reasons. One is how big your operation is. Have you heard of economies of scale? Theoretically, the bigger you get, you're going to be automated. It's going to be less expensive to produce. Where you're located, especially if you're a retail producer, it's going to cost. You can be a retail producer and be off the beaten path, but it's going to take more effort to get people to come there than if you're somewhere that's easy to find you. The time of year. You're going to have more sunlight, better conditions in the spring. In the summer, it's probably going to be hot in the greenhouse. You may get some stunning from too much heat and humidity and other things. So the time of year is going to have a big factor even in a greenhouse, which is protected cultivation, of how much it costs you to produce. What market channel you're in, and it used to be sort of for florists, for greenhouses that produce flowers anyway, sort of the florist and the mass market. Now there's multiple channels. There's, direct marketing, independent garden centers, supermarkets, flowers are everywhere. The volume of production kind of goes back to the size of operation. The product mix. Are you growing something that's considered a luxury item or something that's sort of standard? What about the labor? That's a big cost. Do you have labor that you keep all year round, or do you have to bring in part-time labor? And, that's part of the reason for keeping the greenhouse operating all year. How quickly you pay your supplies. Most suppliers, I think I mentioned this before, if you look on the invoice, it says $210 net 30. Well, what does that mean? That you get a 2% discount if you pay it within 10 days. If you multiply that out, that's like 36% interest a year. Probably not going to do anything else in your greenhouse that makes you that much money. So take advantage of that discount. You're going to have to pay it. The net 30 means you're going to have to pay it in 30 days anyway. So sometimes sitting in the office and being the manager, not always the leader in this case, can make you some money. So the bottom line is everybody's costs are different. You've got to calculate what your costs are. And some of the tools, I came up with a simple cost accounting program based on the fact that I know most of you don't want to sit at a desk. And I've thought about, what do you have already at your hand? Well, you have your income statement or your Schedule F, and then you can add some information on production through a spreadsheet. And so if we divide those up, we've got overhead costs. I keep talking about that. Those are what we sometimes think about as fixed cost. I tend not to call them fixed costs because, in my opinion, in the short run, everything's fixed. You've got that greenhouse sitting there. You're not going to sell it tomorrow unless some magical something happens. But in the long run, everything's variable because you could sell it. Okay, so overhead costs really remain constant regardless of what crop mix you have. Like, you're going to have to pay the interest on that mortgage no matter what you're growing. You're going to have to pay the electrical bill. So the overhead costs are things that are, no matter what crops you have in there, you're going to incur those costs. And the cost per unit will decrease as you increase production. That's why we want to fill that greenhouse up all the time with as many crops as we can, because the more crops we have to spread that overhead cost on, that lowers your cost of production. So what are some of the overhead costs? Well, fixed salaries like yours and other people, your interest, bless you, taxes, advertising and marketing, travel and entertainment, land rental, which you may have if you're a corporation. If you are a sole proprietor, you can't really take that off of your income tax. Depreciation, your utilities, repairs, insurance, office expense, dues and subscription, professional fees, and bad debt. So those are the things we tend to think about as overhead. Now, some of them aren't, like utilities, heating. If you're not going to grow anything in January, you could reduce your heating bill. But I tend to leave it here just because it's so complicated to turn it into a variable cost and apply it to individual crops. But you could, if you take enough time and money, you can do that. Variable costs are often called direct costs, so they can be allocated directly to individual crops, and it tends to be constant per unit. Like, you're going to have a bedding plant flat if you're growing bedding plants, so the cost of the bedding plant is pretty constant unless you buy a whole lot more, and then you'll get a quantity discount. So how do you determine the cost per unit? Well, on the cost accounting program, you first enter the direct cost, and you allocate these to each crop, and then everything else is treated as overhead cost. And again, costs are grower specific. They vary with production and marketing decisions. The They vary with market conditions, your labor supply, age and condition of the facilities, and your managerial skill. And they need to be calculated for your firm. And there is a cost accounting program that we sell as an Excel version. There's also a free version online, and here's the address for that. I think, does that show up on the slide? Okay. So you got that information already. So that one, I thought at the time that I could just take an Excel spreadsheet and put it on the web, and it turns out it's not that simple. So we ended up having to do a lot of programming, and that one only can do 5 crops, but it is a little no-cost one to get you started. So how do you, in this mature market for some of our products, how do we differentiate the product? Well, you can add value, and you can add service, and you could offer things like credit. For example, if you take credit cards, if you're direct marketers and you take credit cards, yes, there is a fee for that. But what happens is if people have cash, they're only going to spend what cash they have in their pocket. If they have a credit card, they're far likely to buy a lot more. So, and that's a service that you're offering them, that they can use their plastic. Delivery, everybody used to get door-to-door delivery. Now we're kind of going back to that. Special wrapping, special containers. Used to, we sold flats of bedding plants and people planted their own. Nobody wants to get their hands dirty now, so they want you to do it for them. And some people, some of our direct marketers have you bring in your container and they'll pot it up for you, or you can come up with pre-planted containers. That's a whole new phenomenon that wasn't around, say, 20 years ago, but that's what people want now, and it's much more profitable than just growing the raw products. Cards, product information, letting people return things, that gives them a sense of security. That's considered, special, a product differentiation, kind of a service, warranty, and branding. We didn't see this, in agriculture a while back, but it's coming in more and more. Proven Winners is a big example of that. They came on with their brand. So this was a study that Harvard Business School did, and they asked managers what goes into price. And they said that consumer willingness to pay, 21% of them said that was how they determined price. 34% said consumers' response to price changes. The 71% said value of the product to the consumer. 75% said price of competing products. 81% said fixed cost. 84% variable cost. So what's the right answer? All of them. Good. Smart class. All of the above. Those all go into determining the price. Okay, so now what I want to talk to is value pricing, and we're going to do a little bit of letting you pretend like you're the consumer and tell me what you would pay for things. So like I said, this is what it cost you, and up here is the perceived value. So like I said, the consumer's willing to kind of split the difference with you and pay somewhere in between. So that's what they perceive as the value, but usually your products have other things that are of value that the consumer may not know. So that's the objective value. So hopefully we can get them up there so they can see the true value of everything that goes into your product or service. So this is our scenario. It's Mother's Day and you're driving to visit your mom, and you pass a roadside stand and you haven't bought any flowers. So you stop and buy a dozen roses. How much are you willing to pay for those dozen roses? More than yesterday. Very good. How close am I to the destination? 45? 40 bucks?
40 bucks, 45.
40, 45?
Last stop, you got to go bring something.
Okay.
You got to buy it.
Okay. So it's a roadside stand. Okay, scenario number 2. You're still Mother's Day. You're going to your mom's. You see an upscale flower shop, and you stop to buy flowers. How much are you going to pay at that flower shop? $60. $60. Anybody else? Well, guess what? That's true. Most people are going to be willing to pay a whole lot more at that upscale florist than the roadside stand. And guess what? They came from the same farm in Ecuador. They're the same roses. But why are you willing to pay more?
It doesn't matter because you're going to farm work and you want to be cheaper.
because it's perceived from where you're buying it, that's considered to be more prestigious, right? So you want to be the upscale vendor where people will pay more, right? Okay, remember that list of things, that little bit of package, that 10 cents worth of packaging is going to make it worth $20 more to you, right? And we all think like this, right? So I'm just going through this so you can start seeing, because a lot of times people tell me, well, the consumer comes in and says, well, I can get it cheaper down the street. Well, you exactly. So you want to be the value person that they're going to pay more for. Okay, so you go off to buy a 10-inch poinsettia at what you believe is the cheapest store in the area. Upon arriving, you find that the 10-inch poinsettia you want costs $29, a price that's consistent with your expectations. You're about to make the purchase, and a friend tells you that the very same 10-inch poinsettia is selling for $10 less at a store 10 minutes away. Do you go to the other store to buy that poinsettia? Okay, but in general, a lot of people would go to save the $10, right? Okay, you're off to buy a dwarf cut-leaf maple, which you believe to be the cheapest store in town. Upon arriving, the cut-leaf maple is $495, and that's consistent with your expectations. You're about to make the purchase when a friend tells you that you can get that same tree $10 less at a store 10 minutes away. Do you go to that other store? No. Yeah, so nobody, okay, but $10 is $10, so half of you were willing to, a minute ago you're going to drive. Exactly. So it's still $10. It's $10, but the percentage off of the total package is really important to everybody. Because nobody would drive for this $10, right? But half of you would drive for the last $10, right? Okay. Okay, so what we're learning of how consumers behave, the price they're willing to pay is impacted by the relative incentives. So how much is that transaction worth? Okay. So another scenario, your poinsettia color, your favorite poinsettia is white, and your local florist has red poinsettias in 10-inch pots for $20, but the white poinsettias are $40. Is this fair or unfair that they're charging that much more for the white ones than the red ones?
It is what it is.
It is what it is. So white's kind of unique, so most people think, yeah, it's fair, right? Your favorite poinsettia color is white. The local florist has red and white poinsettias in 10-inch pots, both for $20, but there's been a run on white poinsettias. So all of a sudden the florist raises the price to $40. Is this fair or unfair?
That is what it is.
Okay. Most people think, in general, most people think this is unfair. So it's back to that luxury item, and that's very valid because the morality comes in a lot of people's mind when it's more of a necessity. They don't worry so much about that when it's a luxury. And that's when I tell people when they call me and want to start a greenhouse because they think everybody has to eat, that's probably the least profitable way of thinking about it. You have to think if I'm growing something really special and not that I'm going to feed the world because, those are two different missions really. So the willingness to pay is impacted by reference prices, the white poinsettias versus the red poinsettias. So people compare, that's again looking at the substitutes. Okay, another scenario. A garden center has no potted tulips in stock, but is about to receive a new shipment. Prior to the delivery, the owner finds out that the wholesale price of the tulips is increased 20% and will affect the new shipment. The owner decides to increase the price of the new tulips by 20%. Is this fair or unfair? Fair, okay. Okay, the garden center has a 1-week supply of tulips in stock and is due to receive a new shipment. Again, they know the price is going to increase 20%, so he immediately increases the price, even on the old ones. Is this fair or unfair? A lot of people, maybe things are changing, but in the past, a lot of people thought this was unfair because what does the consumer think? They already bought these. They only have so much money in them, so they're charging me for this. And you guys...
These are weird questions.
Well, we're assuming the consumer knows that. Remember in the old days where there were stickers on things in the supermarket and they would put layers of stickers? That always irritated people. Now that's all by scan, so you can do it, and I don't think it affects people as much anymore because we kind of don't really know what it was yesterday unless we're following it. But remember I said the consumers, there is sort of a perception of fairness, and they kind of think, well, it cost you this much to produce it, and I think it's worth this much. So anywhere in that between, they think is fair. But now all of a sudden you're jumping. Okay, but they are impacted by what they think it cost you. So the cost of goods sold does sort of play in their mind a little bit. Okay, another one, and this is true. In 1996, the Seattle Mariners made it to the American League playoffs. During the season, the general admission was $15. It's definitely the old days, right? For the playoffs, they raised the price to $20. Is this fair or unfair? That's fair because the playoffs, even though it's the same seats, the same stadium, it's a special game, right? So most people think no big deal. But a hardware store is selling snow shovels for $15. The morning after a large snowstorm, they raised their price to $20. Is this fair or unfair?
We don't like that.
We don't like that because this is like a necessity, right? So we don't like that. Baseball games, luxury, we'll pay it. Snow shovels, they're taking advantage. It's kind of a moral issue, right? So there are perceptions of fairness across product categories. There's not so much fairness when it's luxury, but when it's a necessity, that comes into play, and your customers are going to think that. Okay, 6 months ago you saw an ad for a gala wine and cheese party at a local farm stand, which is a very popular local event. You immediately called and bought a $50 ticket, and today you went to the farm stand and paid that $50 in cash, which is non-refundable. This morning you woke up with the flu. Are you still going to the event, or are you going to stay home? I'm going to get my ticket. You're going to use the ticket, though, right? Okay. You're going to use the ticket because it's $50. Okay, 6 months ago you saw an ad for the same party. Not wanting to take a chance on the event being sold out, you bought the ticket and paid cash for it. Now, this 6 months ago. You wake up this morning with the flu. What are you going to do? One is you just kind of bought the ticket today. The other one is you're buying it 6 months ago.
I'd probably try to still get rid of the ticket.
Yeah. What happens there's some kind of thing about time. This is kind of why season tickets, people, if they buy their tickets a long time ago, somehow it's not as real to them anymore as the money for a lot of people. And this used to drive me crazy about my husband. We'd buy these season tickets and then he would blow it off. Now, to me, it was still $50, but to him, it was like $50 that we spent a long time ago. 6 months ago, it doesn't count as much as today. So there's the time, the closeness. How much value that money has tracks closely the timing of when you pay for it. So that's why those fruit of the month clubs and things work, because you pay for it and it's already gone. You know, there's the fruit of the month where there's cattle. I think Harry and David will send you a fruit every month. So once you paid for it, it's kind of that money's already gone. Memberships, like gym memberships. How many people pay for a whole year and then never go to the gym? Because once the money's gone, now they wouldn't like to shell out the money if they were doing it every day, but... Okay, it's early spring in New Jersey. Your local upscale garden center is offering to fill an indoor planter for you with seasonal plants. You think it's a great idea, so you prepay for 3 more at $40 for the rest of the year. Now it's December and you have had 3 planters, but you still are due 1, and your children give you a prepaid trip to Mexico. They suggest you forget about the planter and pack your suitcase. What do? Mexico. Yeah, that $50 planter or $40 planter compared to your trip, no big deal. So that's the bundling the services. How close to the time you pay for it has an impact. And also, you know, the relative value of that trip to Mexico versus the $50 planter that you're throwing out. You probably wouldn't even bother to go give it to anybody else. You're just going to pack and get going, right? Exactly. So when you're strategizing on how to price your products, try to remember all these scenarios and think about what do you want. When people say the person down the street's cheaper, you want to have them compare your product to something that's more expensive, not less expensive. And you want to cite all the value that you've put into that product. So you want to be the upscale florist, not the garden center, right? You want to manage the price trends. You want to make sure they compare favorably products to your products. And you don't want to have them compare unfavorable products. You want to be differentiated. So you want to manage the perceptions of how much it costs you to produce it. You want to focus what we call a fully loaded cost of goods sold, the packaging, that you're planting up the planters, that you have heirloom tomatoes, whatever it is, that you wash them, they're not going to get their hands dirty. So you want to bundle that product. Remember you said with the upscale florist, it's got that packaging and things. Well, if you think about it, that packaging wasn't very expensive, but it's worth a lot to you because you need it right now. You're 10 minutes from your mom's house. So you don't really think so much about how much that packaging cost, and that's one way you can increase the value of your products for the consumer is give them things they want and bundle it in the whole package and focus the attention on the consumer value. And I even hear National Public Radio now talking about value proposition. So that's, what are you doing that's of value to the customer? So again, what the consumer is willing to pay is the perceived value minus the actual price, which you talked about earlier, but then all those examples talked about these other things that come into the fairness in a lot of people's mind. So what are the relative incentives to enter into the transaction? How consistent is the price you're charging to their reference price of what they think it's supposed to be? The economic utility, what category are you, luxury or utility? Timing of payments, remember if they pay for it early versus now, they don't think so much about the price. And price bundling, in other words, wrapping that packaging and all those services into the price. So those are all the factors that drive how much consumers are willing to pay. So some common pricing mistakes that producers make is you price too high relative to the consumer's expectations. They're not going to buy it. They start thinking that's unfair. You fail to adjust the price from one area to another based on fluctuating prices and consumers' willingness to pay. Or attempting to compete on price alone. Like you said, that's going to lose for everybody. Selling prices too low with the intention of raising them. What happens? That's really hard to raise it once you've got that expectation set. Or discounting prices so low that what's going to happen? They're going to hang around and wait for you to discount the prices the next time. So when the prices are low, what can you do? Well, you increase your marketing skills and start talking about the value of your product. You could buy the competitors' cheap prices and resell them. You can match the price in the short run and hope you can increase in the long run. Try to differentiate your product or try to reduce your cost. So those are all some things you can do in terms of low prices.